Hello, and welcome to this edition, the Thursday, July 2nd edition. I always have to look at the camera and a little clock before I talk because I want to make sure I get the right thing. Thursday, July 2nd, right before a great 3-day weekend. I'm Jay Ruane here with another edition of Max Growth Live with my friend next door over here, way down south at the beach. Seth, how are you doing this week?
Doing great. Nice to get away.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So let me tell you what happened to me last week. I don't think I'm going away anytime soon because my wife slipped off the step and cracked her foot, broke her foot. Non-surgical, we found out yesterday, thank God. But she's been hobbling around on crutches for the last 5 days. I am full-time dad duty and trying to run 2 businesses. It's been a challenging couple of days, but we're going to get through it. It's not like we're really missing anything this summer because pretty much everything's been canceled.
You know, we're down at the beach and was fortunate to get to go fishing yesterday. And as you know, as a social being, I look on Facebook, friends around me, and found not only a really powerful referral source and cool lawyer from my market down here, who I got to meet up with briefly for a cup of coffee. And was able to get not just our fishing spoils, but he's at a very elite fishing level. Had some great tuna gifted to me by him. But this morning, got to meet up with a Max Law friend as well. And that just the idea that you're on vacation, you're getting away, but being able to intersperse a little bit of inspiration, both from a super large shop and a solo, got me thinking about something I'd love to discuss today, Jay.
Sure.
Which is basically, looking at adding, we're talking about growth. How do you grow? And there's a lot of talk about outsourcing overseas. The idea, do you hire somebody part-time? Do you contract out? I call it like the Lee Rosen method. No employees, but everything is outsourced. Or is it hiring more employees? And frankly, for me, part of the reason I've scaled and gotten where I am, and scale is that I've added a tremendous amount of expense by leveraging a lot of internal employees. Not that we don't outsource a lot, but that the idea that when you get to a certain amount of work to be done, does it make sense to add a full-time employee? And when is it better to, bring somebody on contractually or outsource overseas versus having a full-time person that you are paying, whether they're in your office or outside your office, but somebody who you control that's not in and out? What are your thoughts on that, Jay?
So this is a really interesting topic, and it certainly goes about growing your firm, which I think makes it relevant to what we do here every Thursday. And really, I think it just comes down to what your vision is for your own life. I think personally, the way that I have been able to succeed is adding employees in my offices that I can work with, mold, and turn into what I need them to be. Now, I came to the system game probably about a decade ago, but I had been in practice for 12 years before that. So when I found my systems, I found the ability to, bring people on and bring people in that are virtual, bring in outsources because I could point them to the system that we use, and they do. But before I was really systems based, I found it difficult to outsource because I didn't really have a place for them to go to learn how to do, and it was more of a hands-on training. So I think that's the first conversation you need to have with yourself is how committed are you to your systems and have you built them? Because if you have systems, it's easy to give somebody access to your systems, and they can be, if in Florida, in Timbuktu, and they can execute.
But I think that there's a threshold question. Like, okay. Look, you're as good as anybody at building the systems, but let's take a step back. What level of labor is needed for each job? Now you can look at your systems or your specs and figure that out. There are certain things, whether it's like cleaning up an email list. Clearly that is something that could be sent offshore, that could be used with overseas labor, great. But as you start to look at a job, let's say it's a case manager and PI or a paralegal and criminal, as you look at those things, I think part of it is figuring out what can be hitting a system where it's almost McDonaldized. You look at the E-Myth, like you take the burger, you put it on the thing, you flip it, you put it on the bun, versus where there is some discretion needed. And the discretion, you can still systematize the boundaries that somebody has, but people who are client-facing, intake people, those are things where I feel like it's very important to figure out what it is you need. Is it somebody who's just going to get a name and phone number and pass it on? Okay, great. That's one level of outsourcing. But if it's somebody who's going to really be the person who is determining if there are funds there, determining if there's liability, and or helping to pre-sell an attorney, it gets dicey. And that if you push too far towards what I'll call outsourcing, where it's a third party that, yes, you can give them a system, but they may not have the same education level, they may not have the same wherewithal to connect. Those are those really tough decisions that have to be made along the way, where certain tasks, work really well that way, and you can hand them that system and they follow it. And certain things, there is that sort of X factor, which is harder to systematize. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, I think the X factor is something that we need to talk about because, your office culture, even if you're a solo, is something that's going to drive the growth of your practice. And, it's very difficult with outsourced work to have a culture. And that culture is not only something that impacts your employees, it impacts your own mental sanity and stability as you grow your firm. But it also impacts the clients, right? Because they have to have a feeling as being part of something bigger because they've chosen to bring their problem to you. And I think it's very difficult if you're going to outsource your intake to somebody virtual and they don't have the same the same feelings as you have. That could be a problem. And I remember talking to Harlan not so long ago about one of the problems with intake, and they had a PI firm had outsourced intake to somebody, and they were saying that they were a personal injury firm looking for car accident cases, and there was a tractor trailer accident with major damages, and the outsourced intake person said, "Oh no, we don't do truck accidents, we do car accidents," and hung up the phone. And only when the partner got the recording, he flipped his lid and said, "You know what? I'm bringing that back in house."
And that's a great story, but what are the odds that you're ever going to even hear that recording?
But,
I mean,
that's the problem. Unless you have literally thought about everything possible before you go to outsource. If that was happening in your office, somebody might hear and say, "Oh no, we do truck accidents," and yell to them on the phone.
But right, so this is the dilemma I see, and this was a really interesting conversation. If you go directly overseas, labor might be as cheap as $2 to $5 an hour, but that's not a real number because you need somebody to hire them, you need to be able to monitor them, and many of the groups that outsource, the net number might be around $15 an hour, and in one sense, this is what I've struggled with. So let's say hypothetically that $15 an hour gets you somebody who is monitored, so they're working, they're selected. If they fall out, they'll get somebody else, and you have your systems in place. Now comes the issue of, okay, and I think that all the major companies, Delta Airlines, Amex, everybody has moved their call centers either India or Southeast Asia, and you could see they've gotten better. And my understanding is their over-under is 20 some odd dollars an hour, 22, 23, maybe $25 an hour all in. And my first reaction when I hear that, or let's say for somebody at our level, like a $15 an hour managed worker offshore, the issue is, okay, at $15 an hour, that's what you're getting. Now, let's say domestically, and we've seen a dip, we've seen more people needing jobs now, so somewhere in that $17 to $20 an hour, you can get somebody domestically to do that. Now, there's vacation, there's unemployment tax, there's liability, there's severance, there are all sorts of issues that make it more expensive than that. But the question is, when is outsourcing a good deal? Meaning that you could, always talked about content writers for Blue Shark are always contractors because I want to be able to turn them off and on. If somebody goes off their meds, I want them not writing for me anymore. And if they're doing great, we just keep paying them. It keeps happening, but there's not a there's no farewell party if somebody starts writing bad content. We just don't give them another order. When is it right to find that overseas widget that can do the work? And when is it better to be saying, you know what, if I'm going to have 40 hours of work done, yes, it's going to cost me more than what it would cost to send it offshore, but I have a person here who can think, relate to clients on a good day. How do you make that decision?
Oof, that's a lot to unpack there, because it's it really comes down to, I think, the comfort level of the owner of the firm, because one of the things that we haven't talked about yet that I think is something that a lot of firm owners need to think about is that by hiring somebody and having them locally in your office, they become a referral source for you as well. They're out there as a disciple saying, "Hey, hire my law firm," and you touch their people locally.
And I'm just going to jump in so we can make this rapid fire. I see that sometimes. Not all the time. You get the right person, absolutely.
Yeah,
There's
sure.
plenty of people that will work their entire career with you and never do it. Now, maybe that's on me to make sure that we proselytize that more internally, create that culture. I think there's a certain amount of it, but part of the reason when I speak to lawyers and law firms that are very scaled and big marketed firms, very often those lawyers hardly ever. That's the bane of every scaled firm's existence, is that the lawyers don't bring in work. And you got to be careful what you ask for, because if the person was great at bringing in work, they wouldn't need you. Sure. They would just go off and do it on their own. And for staff, yes, it's an X factor. What else could happen? Something that I've always talked about, and Jay, we've already joked about, is when you hire somebody, it's true for a first hire, and it could be true if after a long-time employee leaves. The first hire you make may not stick. The second hire may not stick. It may take that third hire before you figure out, get your systems right, get the right person for that. Now, I wish we could just skip those 1 and 2, but it's a real issue. So you're getting much more when you do get them, whether it's referrals, whether it's figuring out what you need, having somebody who can do different elements, client-facing work that somebody offshore might not be able to do. Those are those decisions that, while it's very expensive to hire a full-time person, and there are many steps before you get to that should clearly be evaluated, there's a X factor, referrals and or other pieces that having a person, I don't want to say you own, because that's a bad nomenclature, but somebody who doesn't have other business interests besides getting your stuff done. They're not part-time, they're not doing something else, that they're, for those 40 hours a week, they're working on helping you build your business.
Yeah, well, and here's the thing that I think a lot of lawyers, thinking, you might look at your workload and say, what, I have projects that I can outsource to a VA, and this VA needs 5 hours a week to be able to get it done, so I outsource for $100, I get that done. And then I'm going to have another VA, so one does medical records requests, another one does financial affidavits, if you do family law, and so you have multiple VA talent levels. But what you could find is that one person that you bring in could have 4 skills, right? I laugh because I have met probably 100 to 200 receptionists who are also the marketing manager, which seems to be a title that they give to the receptionist as a way to not have to pay them more. But the reality is,
or aspirational, as if that they don't need to do more to get marketing done.
Right, exactly. And one of the problems I find with outsourcing work is that unless you have an extremely high volume where you've got discrete parts that people are going to be executing, it's almost impossible to fill one VA the same way you could fill somebody who's in-house, who can say, oh, you need that copied? I can go do that for you right now. Like the in-house person is able to pick up, sort of read the room, that the VA is like, well, there's no more work on my plate. I got nothing to do. All right, I'll stop working. But when you've got somebody there, if they've worked 30 hours and then you say, I've got this other project that I need you to work on, they can just jump right in and do it. You don't have to task it, think about it, set up them to do it. So it just seems like having somebody in-house, for me, has always been the better way.
So like, I'll give you an example of something that, again, and I think VA, let's take the word VA out of it. It's whether or not it's somebody you have part-time domestically, part-time overseas. The advantage, I guess, some overseas labor is so reasonable that even if it's not efficient, it still works. We were very heavy in recruiting, like, between Price Benowitz and Blue Shark, I have a constant need for labor. I'm trying to new ideas I want to expand into. So we have a person who's full-time on recruiting. And every morning they come in, and all the resumes that have come in from LinkedIn, Indeed, or Craigslist, they need to be processed. Some of them go directly into our CRM, and some have to be uploaded. And that's one of those things that eventually I said, you know what, that could be somebody, relatively low dollar talent, doesn't need to be overnight, so it's great to be in a different time zone, where they take all of that, and when the recruiter comes in Monday morning, they're all ready to go. And so I feel like, again, it maybe goes back to Jay's great systems. If you're able to put systems in place and have hours that are needed on a regular basis, it seems the value is much, much greater than if it's a potpourri where, while it's great to have that talent, it can be very disconcerting because you really can't feed the stuff to somebody as efficiently as if there's somebody there who can read your signals and help collaborate with you.
Yeah. So okay. So let's take a step back now. Say you're a true solo, right? Hanging a shingle. What do you think that And now you see, okay, I have the need. I've got enough clients that have come in, and her practice is growing. She's got a decent enough caseload where there's legal work to be done, but there's also administrative work to be done. Probably about 20 hours a week worth of work. Is it wiser, from your perspective, Seth, to bring somebody in locally to do that? Or is it wiser to try to find somebody outsourced that you can just push it off to, knowing that there might be almost the same expense, because this is, low dollar administrative work. This isn't something where you need a PI paralegal with 10 years experience doing heavy litigation. This is opening files, e-filing or fax filing pleadings, checking the mail, scanning it, that type of thing. So this is the first assistant.
You know me well enough. The answer is going to be it depends, not just on how well you can systematize the work to be done for the assistants, right? Because the stuff that overseas needs to be J. Ruane systematized to the T. You can't just hope for something. Anything that you just say, get it done, will not be getting done. So it must be systematized. And I feel like history is always written by the victor. If you hire that great person, whether it's the first hire or the second hire, if you get somebody who can build and grow with you for a number of years, that's a really valuable person that can add a lot of extra value to you. But if you are, we have friends that we're very close to that are not great at hiring, that are not great at motivating, and are not great at supervising, that by knowing that you don't have any leeway, it may force you to create much tighter systems. I may be lazier at allowing people more discretion because I'm hiring domestically than if I knew that everything had to be created in a E-Myth McDonaldized way, that it's forcing more discipline. That could be part of that discussion. And when I look at sort of, the economics, it's not that the outsourcing with all those layers of managed outsourcing are cheap, but it does allow you to not have to deal with some of the idiosyncrasies of domestic hiring.
Yeah, and that's always a challenge. Having people locally and having to manage them is certainly something. I posted something in the Max Law Facebook group, and let's talk a little bit about that, because I think it's something that helps you as you grow, right? And I want to get your perspective on this. One of the things that I implemented years ago was a weekly survey where I would send it out to all my staff and say, hey, answer a couple questions. Do you need anything like technical supplies? Do you have any IT needs? How are you feeling this week? Have you noticed anything that we can add a system for? That type of thing. And then, so there's a company called 15.5. I modeled mine off of theirs. I know a couple people have used their service, and it was really great for getting insight into my employees, especially the ones who, like, when they say, "How are you feeling this week?" and they go, "I'm not so good," and then they tell you what's going on, and maybe it means, hey, you go, you sit down with them, you talk to them about, maybe they're not getting along with another employee, maybe they're having some personal time and personal issues and need a little flexibility with their schedule, and that's been a great tool. Last night I was thinking about this, and I said, everyone talks about NPS for your clients, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, would you recommend us? And then I thought, would it be a good idea to do a daily NPS to your employees? How are you feeling today on a scale of 1 to 10? And start to try to identify trend lines. Maybe start to see people who used to be 9s. Now all of a sudden they're 6s, and they're consistently 6s. That might give you some insight into maybe somebody's looking to leave. And that type of thing. Have you done anything as your firm went from you and David to you and David and 100 to saying, how do we keep tabs on our people as we grow?
A couple things. I tried modeling those weekly surveys. I think ours have morphed into monthly. I had trouble getting everybody just to fill them out. Like, it's always great to talk about these ideas, and maybe it was my presentation of them, or maybe it's sort of the culture that I have, but I was not getting rapid response, so we went to less often, not more often. When we've been in the office, it's much easier. I make rounds on a daily basis and push and try to see, can I see body language? Because to me, that's more valuable than anything else, if you can sort of just see what's going on. And to a certain extent, I've relied upon what I'll call mid-level managers. Again, most people on this who will listen to this don't have the same issue, but I'm relying upon people that are not me to tell me when those things are happening. What the pandemic has done is everything is now grouped. The good news is we've had more structured meetings on a weekly basis for staff, for departments, for practice areas. It's been very disciplined, and it's worked rather well as far as connecting. The downside is, we took a pandemic for us to put that structure in place. And I think the reason it's there is people have a couple extra hours a day when they don't have commuting time involved. So it's been easier to do. And I've struggled with it. How do you extract that feel? And I think as I've grown, part of it is I'm not going to get the straight scoop. I am now like a figurehead or a lightning rod, good and bad, and that I really need, if I want truth, very often a person between me and the employee to give me that information, because I'll get a sugar-coated answer or I'll get silence. And that's the most frustrating part that I'm seeing is when I try personally not to use a mid-level manager and read a meeting on Zoom, well, I don't get negative, I get silence, and I have no idea where that silence is. Is it silence because they're just like copacetic, it's a B player and they're okay? Or is there really something going on? And so I've tried to say, hey, these people are silent, push back to the mid-level managers. You need to dig deeper on these people. I get a pretty good sense from these people that we're okay. But that's, as I've scaled and it's harder to touch everybody at once, that's been a struggle I've had.
Yeah, it's certainly been a struggle for me, especially during a pandemic, to reach out and make sure that you're touching everybody, just, hey, how you doing? One of the things that I've been trying to do is identify things that I can praise people for almost weekly and say, hey, I caught that you did that. Great job. I want you to, I want to make sure that you are, that you're hearing me give you that feedback that I might normally be able to do in the office. And so it's
might not give it all. I mean, right. Like that's the thing, right? You very often in the office. I mean, look, we want to praise everybody all the time, but there's a certain amount of sort of body language where you're like, oh, they know that you're happy with it. Versus now, I've done the same thing, is really trying to go over the top. Probably could always do more, but making sure that it's very, very clear verbally that something is going great and that we are doing well, and that I think that now that we've come out of that sort of scare time, hey, I want to have my job. And we're sort of now in a new normal, like it's not going anywhere anytime soon, especially in the bigger cities, that we are stuck with this for a while. And we now need to recalibrate and not think we're about to bounce back to the office anytime soon.
Yeah, that's certainly something that I think is going to be a problem for us, especially when we do get back into the office. I think the habits that people are forming now, getting back into the office, whether it's September or January or whenever it's going to be, it's your culture in your office has changed somewhat because of this. And now the question is, are you able to grow from it, or are people going to have a problem getting back? And there's going to be some initial sort of jubilation. Hey, we're all back together, that type of thing. But I think it could also pose some problems. It's something I think people got to look out for.
But like this sort of circles back to things that we started with, which is, I'll take Blue Shark. There are a number of people in the digital marketing space that I've always thought of as being sub-ideal because they were completely work from home. And to me, part of that piece, and there have been some articles on this recently, that there have been a bunch of movements to have work from home. And while a bunch of the social media companies that are mega profitable have said, yes, we're going to have work from home going forward, time after time, as corporate America has sort of said, hey, let everybody work from home, the ability to get value has diminished. Whether it be IBM or whether it be Yahoo, they all contracted back to majority work in an office setting because they couldn't get the same productivity from home on a long-term basis. And, I have a lease coming up in Blue Shark, and we have that decision. We really want a collaborative work environment, but is the genie out of the bottle? And again, for somebody who's a solo, where that's not even, where they don't have that infrastructure built. I feel like as you scale, there's a certain value because you're not going to be able to touch your line employees that having the mid-level manager who's not as talented as you perhaps, to be able to manage those people. It's a heck of a lot easier to put your thumb on what's going on in person rather than having to do that remotely. And certain jobs, I think, are more possible to work that way. Like our intake, I think, has done a remarkable job going virtual. But the collaboration piece, even with an ongoing chat, I've really pushed for video streaming, which I've gotten a lot of pushback on, but I really like the idea that you're not sitting in your hovel alone, but you're working collaboratively. These are the things that I'm struggling with. And am I old school, or is there real value to having that roof over you and that people coming and leaving their home and that demarcation, how much are we going to go back to in the office, and how much is this going to be like, okay, we can do this from home?
It's interesting, this conversation sort of brings us really full circle, right back to the original topic of today of, is it better to bring somebody in-house, or is it better to have somebody outsourced, either domestically outsourced or overseas outsourced? And I think it really comes down to, what kind of culture are you trying to build? What are the tasks that people are going to be doing? What's your volume of work, right? Because that certainly is something. If you have an intake person who's outsourced, and taking a step back, and I love Lee. I got a lot from when I was part of the Rosen Institute. I've had great conversations with him. He's pushed me personally in some areas, which as a mentor was phenomenal. But Lee's model of having basically everything outsourced sort of is like if you remember the movie Heat, right? Have everything that you could just drop and walk away at any moment. That's not good for necessarily building something long term, right? De Niro's problem, he walked away, right? He tried to walk away from Amy Brenneman, and he couldn't because he couldn't follow his mantra, and he got killed by Pacino, right? So at the end of the day, you lose when you try to live a lifestyle like that.
I see exactly. Look, and I have similar feelings. Lee is inspirational, and if you want to stay solo and be able to sleep at night with zero debt, I get it. But I love the way he thinks. But I've seen it not as a scalable. It's not scalable. It's maybe profitable for a single operator who doesn't want to create something larger. Although he did at one point have a larger operation. But it is something that when you add, and Jay, you and I have gone back and forth on this. To me, I think part of the reason for our success has been hiring people to execute on marketing ideas. Nobody has more marketing ideas than Jay. And I think only recently have you said, okay, if I want to do FirmFlex, I need people that are not me to help put this in motion. And that has been sort of the back and forth. And then all of a sudden, I have all these people that I need to feed. Thankfully, there's a revenue model behind it, but there's with employees, with people to do things, you can get stuff done. Now, in theory, it's almost like the concept of owning versus renting a car when you live in New York. It's cost effective if you rented a car every time you wanted to drive somewhere. So if you got rid of your monthly nut for car payment and insurance and a parking lot, and just rented a car from Hertz, or they're out of business, Avis, or a Zipcar, every time you wanted to go anywhere, even if it costs you $500 for a day, you may only rent the car twice a month. It's a huge savings. But if you're going to go visit Jay in Connecticut, rather than take an Uber for $150 each way, you would say, "No, I'm going to save the money. I'll take the train." You may not take the train because it's a pain. You got to go to the station. You got to get on the train, and so by analogy, if you have the infrastructure, you can execute on things you want to do to build and grow your firm. Whereas if everything you want to build and grow, in theory, it would be cost effective to buy each widget individually. You may not, because you're evaluating the cost of each of those ideas' execution. I'm talking on the micro level, on a case-by-case basis, and somebody has to retain and find that person rather than having a talent pool that you can go to get the work done.
Yeah, no, I think, those are all considerations. I was talking to Ryan McKean a while back, and he goes, every lawyer wants to find that source of labor that's a third of what everybody else is paying and not have to manage them and just be able to get things done. But finding those people that don't really exist and the ability to manage them takes up more of the time than you're ever going to want to give, but you have to do it. And it really comes down to, how do you want to grow your firm? Do you want to do it insourced, or do you want to do it outsourced? And then commit to it, right? I think the thing that you and I can both say is, once you make that decision, go all in and make sure that you have the systems in place, the resources in place, whether they're in-house or outsourced, so that they can execute fully and you're actually getting the best bang for your buck.
And I'll take a slightly different perspective while not disagreeing with yours, which is identifying what's right for each one. If you have things that are highly labor intensive, that are going to take hours to do, cleaning up email lists, things that can be done by somebody where it's, where a lower dollar person can do it over time, great. But if you have stuff that is where one mistake can cost you dramatically, that is where I think you have to be very careful about how you're putting those out there. And I'll sort of bring it back to reality. Again, I have a pretty complicated financial situation. We tried using one of the popular Indian accounting groups to do some of our bookkeeping and check entry, which seemed like a no-brainer. Overnight, get it done for the next morning. We could not, using one of the ones that everybody loved, we couldn't get the quality we needed, and it cost us more. And even if it wasn't more, I couldn't. It was the disruption to the business, because maybe I didn't have the system to clean up what they were doing. I couldn't get it close enough where, while it was cost effective, it didn't give me the complete widget that I needed. And therefore, it was sort of a defective widget. And at our scale, we couldn't live with that. I'm curious to you, have you had examples where you've tried to do something by systematizing it offsite, offshore, et cetera, where you've had to bring it back?
That's the exact same situation I had. I went overseas for my bookkeeping, and I brought it back in-house because I was running into problems. Because I thought, hey, the numbers are numbers. Doing bank reconciliations and stuff, it'll be very easy for somebody overseas at a cheaper dollar rate. And what I found was I needed somebody in-house to be able to do it, so that we had that sort of micro control over it. The other thing that we've had trouble with, and I think you talked a little bit about it, was outsourcing content writing. And we were not doing it overseas; we were doing it domestically. We were tapping into people, and we were finding the quality that we would get. We would get really good quality the first couple of pieces, and then it just became them trying to sneak in, cut and paste things, and it was much better for us instead to bring people in-house over the summer, get some English students, graduate level students, bring them in and work July and August, and bang out a ton of content that we would have then for the entire year that we could actually approve on the spot when they're in front of us, and basically have stuff in the can that would last us for 6 or 9 months rather than try to outsource it over the entire year.
And I think that sort of proves a point. Without scale, you're one law firm. While it's a big law firm, as I moved to create Blue Shark, I didn't have that luxury. I couldn't do just the summers. I needed the year round. The machine had to keep being filled. And so I had to sort of adapt, and every piece of content that is written comes with an attached Copyscape or whatever the software of the day is to show us that it is unique content and not copied from somewhere on the web. So basically, I didn't have the luxury of abandoning it. I had to sort of create systems to allow for the replication at scale. And I think that accounting is a great example. Both of us failed overseas for our law firms. Blue Shark's a pretty simple operation. 100 clients, there's a credit card once, at most twice a month, handful of expenses. It's really pretty simple. And that using a domestic outsourced bookkeeper has worked particularly well because there aren't as many moving parts. Whereas in the law firm with different areas of law and all sorts of nuances, it was a disaster where I couldn't get somebody to learn enough, to be able to get it done with reasonable quality. I think that's the key. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And the question is, are you okay with the paying less or using labor that is not domestic? I'm going to be sort of, I don't know, it's prejudice, but what I have seen generally is that, and you see this for writing in particular, that the education level you get domestically is generally significantly higher than we get overseas for the most part, and that there's a level of sort of error that may be acceptable when you're starting because you have your thumb on everything, but that as you scale, it is harder and harder to catch all those errors, and that just like everything that we scale, it's harder. That the outsourcing is almost easier when you're more junior, but as you grow and there are more moving parts, that whether it's domestic or here, if you can't just add that layer of contract work, but you have to have the checks and balances to quality control it. Otherwise, it's a bad bargain.
Yeah. Wow, that's a lot to unpack, and I think we've given a lot of people a lot of stuff to think about over this upcoming 3-day weekend. I think we should end it there because, of course, as usual, we're overtime. But hey, that's just the way it goes here at Max Growth Live. There's always stuff that we can talk about with growth. So, Seth, what do you got planned for the 4th of July weekend?
We're just finishing off our beach week here, trying to get some great quality time with the family in and get, it's weird because I feel like if I had my way, I would just stay at the beach and work from here. But I feel like it's time to get back to reality and be at the homework desk instead of the vacation work desk.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna be getting off and starting to prepare dinner. I've got to figure out what to feed these kids tonight now because I'm taking care of my wife as well as the 4 kids, and we've got some. I got to get some baseball practice in because Little League starts next week. Very excited about that. So that's my plan for the big weekend.
Awesome.
So all right, so let's sign off here now, Seth, for another edition of Max Growth Live. My friend over here, Seth Price. I'm Jay Ruane. Thank you so much for being with us. Have a wonderful 4th of July weekend, and we'll see you here again next Thursday on another edition of Max Growth Live. Bye for now.